Welcome to our technical session 6A of 5th International Conference on ICT 4SD. Due to COVID-19, we all are going through a new normal phase, and the theme of ICT 4SD, which is your safe and healthy time for you and your well-wishers. We are constantly trying to overcome the challenges that research community is facing at a different level. We at Global Knowledge Research Foundation are fully committed to contribute and enhance the digital experience in research activities. To continue further, this conference has received tremendous number of submission, which has across more than 1,000 plus numbers and 20 plus countries marked through direct submission and special session, out of which 340 papers were accepted by the technical review committee, and we were only able to accommodate 160 paper in a two volume in this publication. Once again, we all would like to congratulate you for your research work and to be a part of this success story in a fifth version of this conference. Further, I would like to welcome our session chair to take on this session, Dr. Neeraj Bhargava, Associate Professor in Maharishi Dayanand Saraswati University. He has a more than 22 years of academic experience, and his expertise in the field of GIS database management system and AI. Welcome, sir. Welcome in our session. Now, I would like to invite our first presenter, S.K. Shankar.
Hello.
Hello.
Yeah, ma'am. Thank you. Just can I share my screen right now?
Yes, 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 please.
Yeah, okay, sure. That's just hold on 1 second. Ma'am, is this my screen is available?
Yes, please go ahead with your presentation.
Yeah, okay. Thank you. Okay. So myself, Shankar, I'm from Hindustan Institute of Technology and Science. I'm a research scholar over there. So my research, what I have focused is the current technology, what that have been booming up the industries. That is the blockchain technology. So my challenge here, how we can adopt and secure digitization of graduate assessments can be done by using the blockchain technologies. So we have a lot of technologies available for securing digitizations of assessments, but still there is a huge gap that has been taken in the market. So I'm just focusing on this market gap, which exactly which exactly and how we can solve this problem for this assessment. I mean, security purpose of assessments what have been taken place in online digital medias, because now we are in COVID-19 this impact. So everyone, all the universities and colleges all over the Anna universities, I mean government of this Tamil Nadu, all colleges that have been undergoing with online education system right now. So here the online education system, we have so many platforms that has been involved, but the biggest challenge with us is how we are going to assess the students and how we are going to give the graduations, I mean assessment results.
Sorry for interrupt, Shankar. Your slide is not movable. Please check.
No, I'll be getting inside, ma'am, because I'm just giving you an overview of that.
Okay, okay, then no problem.
Okay, so this is the thing what I focused here. I don't want to present as a research paper with all the things, but I just want what exactly I have worked for this many days for this thing what we have been put in as a secure digitizations. We'll be discussing about these things. It will be an assessment thing what we have done here. So myself, Shankar, as I mentioned, this is my professor Rajeshwari, Mukesh, and Badri Narayanan. They are the supervisor and co-supervisors of my research. And the first thing what I want to ask with you all guys is whether it is called as this thing, digital assessments at TouchFay. Do we all accept? Yes, we all accept. But we have so much of challenges to be taken up. So inside a higher educations, digitization plays a huge role, because to improve the quality of education, the youngsters, we are the youngsters that should be research oriented and to be innovative, so that we'll create a pace for the industry or society, so that all digitizations, all the certifications, whatever we do, or whatever the degree holders, whatever you are studying up, all the things will be carried out through digitization itself. So when we had gone through this process, whether we have digitized a touchware really, we had implemented with some of the faculties of our university, and we had made a ground level and a mass scale of analysis, what exactly the opinion that matters to us exactly right now in the market. So if you see here, the digitization of graduate assessment, these are the major challenges that each and every one will adopt. So first one is assessment. The thing what I mentioned, the first one, the assessment in terms of access, first thing, that is a major. Because for example, we are using so many platforms, Zoom, Zoom, we are using Google Meetup, you will be using Microsoft Teams, will be using. So if you see the assessment access, if we have a bulk number of assessment access inside, then immediately your server will be down for some time. So immediately what will happen, there will be a popping message in the screen that, okay, wait for this thing, our page doesn't load. Something like this, we have the biggest flaw. And recently, when we had a Moodle examinations happening in and around the places, what happened is more than 250 plus users, if you are able to log in, that's it, finished. We are not able to access the Moodle platform for assessments. So that is a huge flaw. That is the first one which I was to focus here. And the second thing is on emphasis on quality. So whether we are actually giving the exact quality, what we should emphasize, and also the values and relevance and ethics with assessment of records digitally. So this is the major challenges what we have come up with this opinion matter with some of the faculties in and around Tamil Nadu. And the methodology for what we have took here is we have splitted this opinion matters into two types of things, pre-received and preserved challenges. So let's discuss in the upcoming slides what exactly it does. And we have conducted with selected faculty members who have developed and implemented the digital assessments through platforms like Google Classrooms, Moodle. With these faculties only we have focused here now. And with this, the survey report, what we got with the assessment, what we have taken up, with that only we are coming to the prescribed challenges and all the process, whatever we have involved. So, and the next second point, if you see here, the study involved collecting data by administering the 4-part questionnaire under the following headings. So these all are evaluated on a 5-point grading scales, and we got these results. Overall usefulness of digital assessment is 60% and 40% says no. Because why? Because is we will be seeing in the upcoming slides. So these are the perceived benefits what we have took from the survey. This is the first thing is enhancing learners interactivity. That is a key thing what we should focus when we go for digitization of assessments, all the process, whatever we are going for digitizations. And improving the management of student records, identity authentications, enhancing accountability, control of data access, students assessments, high security, low cost. Here the security plays a huge role. So we have prescribed benefits, we have come up with these key terms. So based on these key terms only, we got the challenges and the what is the drawback, what we are exactly facing up, and what is the positiveness that have been taken place in this. So these are the perceived challenges. Familiarity with the interface, everyone has this problem, and the trust building, privacy and security, cost, scalability, preparatory issues, structural limitations in question settings, and fitness to all domains, that is creative subjects, typing ability of the students. So when we made a survey of this benefits, if you see here in the graphical representation, this enhancing student assessment is having a score of more than 24 points something, and we have better control of data access that has taken the lead in this process, because the Moodle platform, whatever we use for Google Classrooms, Google Meetups, whatever, for data access, it is very, very easy. And second thing, for enhancing accountability also, it has given a good score here, and improving the management of student records based on the assessments, so we can decide what in which part exactly he is leading up. I mean, he is facing.
Shankar, you have last 2 minutes. Please conclude your presentation.
Yeah. Okay. And next, the thing is that which I mentioned here. So better control of data access, we had assessment and improved managements are the 3 prescribed benefits. And there are the concerns coming from with interactivity, security, and cost dimensions. That is a major key that has been placed in digital assessments. And this is about the challenges of digitized assessments. what we have challenges, exactly what problem we are facing up. So the top 3 issues, if you see here, typing ability of the students, because every student can't have this thing. What is the major drawback what we have? Because so many people will be having a low typing ability students, and how they are going to put the answers on the online platform, and how it's going to be get assessed and within the time frames. And next one, structural limitation in questions. For example, if you go for architectural department, there will be a lot of diagrams involved. So how we are going to put these questions inside, and how we are going to make an impact. And next one, last one, is the familiarity with the interface. That is a major concern. So these are the concerns what we have. So how this blockchain is going to get into the examination assessment system, what is the actual plan we focused here is a self-sustained educational ecosystem can be developed on the top of blockchain. This is a blockchain we bought here mainly for security purpose only, because lot of data are getting leaked out, because we use a third party for printing the certificates. So that is a major drawback. So that once they use the blockchain technology inside this assessment techniques and valuations, we can easily secure the data, and we can avoid the third parties inside. So that is a thing. This is a 3 key structure what we can use here to make the test as transparent as possible. We can store everything in a hash digest, that is consists of 32-bit key, and every question is answered, it can be directly ported to the blockchains. So this facilitates the tracing of how exactly candidate receive the score, and he or she receives it, and adding more credibility to the obtain the certificate. So certificates also without third party we can print out, because recently MIT has done a biggest survey. They have put in a diplomatic course in MIT, and they had generated 1,000 digital e-certificates by using blockchain. So this is the thing what I have mentioned. So finally, the conclusion, what I want to just put a words to you guys is, there are few operational challenges, but perceived benefits outweigh the challenges. So with proper training to both faculty and students, we can build a platform with the blockchain that can overcome all the challenges identified, and digitized assessments can be soon a reality in higher education sector. So this is the thing what I have been. These are the references. This is what I want to put it out. Thank you. Thank you for giving an opportunity.
Thank you, Shankar. Sir, any comments regarding this presentation?
It is a very good presentation, and keeping in mind of current needs of India, that we are facing the COVID, and our education system is on the online.
Yes, sir.
You have suggested that you are using only Moodle for your teaching system.
No,
have you used any?
Sorry, sir. Sorry.
Yeah.
Sir, actually, we had put in the 2 platforms here, that Moodle and Google Classrooms. But recently, we had come up with this Microsoft Teams also. Still, we has the same issues that have been facing up, and we are working on this, how we can build this thing so that everyone can use it in a proper this thing.
Okay. Which you have done it.
Sorry, sir.
Yeah, I have done.
Okay.
We
Yeah,
can
thank you,
continue
Shankar. And thank you, sir.
Yeah,
Now I would like to invite our next presenter. It's a B. Kritika.
Am I audible?
Yes.
Yeah. Is my presentation visible, ma'am?
Yes. Please go ahead.
Yes. So, good noon, ma'am, sir. I'm Kirtika, a UG student from the Department of Computer Science and Engineering, Tyagaraja College of Engineering. So, I would like to present the research work that we did on regression models to estimate effort for software-oriented projects. So, this work was carried out by Vignaraj Anand, Assistant Professor, Department of Computer Science and Engineering, along with Aditya, Rahul Kesavan, and myself, Kirtika, UG students, Department of Computer Science and Engineering, Tyagaraja College of Engineering. So, software engineering, it generally deals with the design, development, and maintenance of software applications. So, for any software product or project, The entire development process will be classified into 5 major classes called the planning and requirement analysis, designing phase, implementation, testing, and maintenance. So in all from all these phases, it is the planning and the requirement analysis phase that plays a very crucial role. So what is done in this phase is the cost and the effort required for the successful completion of the project is estimated. So effort means the amount of resources that are to be utilized by the project. So it is generally measured in terms of persons month. That is the amount of work that a average worker can do within a month. So in order for a successful completion of a project, this effort estimation should be very accurate so that the resources can be allotted to the project appropriately. So the present models that were available for effort estimation include COCOMO, FPA, and so on. So the models can be broadly classified into 2 major classes called the algorithmic model and the non-algorithmic model. One example of the algorithmic model is the COCOMO model, called the cost constructive estimation model. It is a procedural model in which which depends purely on the line of code. So the total lines of code required to complete the project will be the base for this, and it does not consider other criteria like the skill of the employee, the environment in which they are working on, and the documentations and all. So similarly, the other one is called the function point analysis. It is an example of non-algorithmic model. So in this, the LOC is not considered. Rather, the functionality that is being delivered to the user are considered to estimate the effort. But the problem with this method is also that there is difficulty in finding the functional points. So there was other method called the use case point method, but this was suitable only for projects that was built using unified modeling language and rational unified process. These are like diagrammatic ways, and they are not, most of the projects do not use this method. So hence the existing models, they fail to consistently estimate the effort cost. So what we are so these are the literature, the paperwork that we referred to find any other methods are there to estimate the effort. So from this, we infer that certain machine learning algorithms like SPM, random forest, ANN, M5P, they are available, which can predict the effort. So among all these methods, we saw that M5P and RF were highly suitable for this kind of problem. So what we thought is, okay, let us implement these algorithms to predict the effort. So hence the objective of the project is to estimate the software effort accurately using regression models like M5P and random forest algorithms. So these are the initial steps. So it highlights the workflow, how we have done. So the first step was to collect the data set containing various parameters which affect the effort of the software project. So then the data set is normalized to a common scale, since the features in our data set consisted of different ranges. After this, random vectors are selected arbitrarily, and they are classified into training sets and testing sets. And finally, the training sets are trained by using RF and M5P algorithm to get the results. So the data set that we have chosen, that we have gathered, has we collected it from various sources like ISBSG and Western University. So there were data on 150 different projects, which contained approximately 350 tuples of data in every project file. So there were 4 columns in our data. The first 3, called the team size, the productivity of the team, and the complexity of the project. These forms the input vector, and the effort is the actual effort that was required for the completion of such products. So that forms the output vector. So for normalization, we chose the min-max algorithm, and it's a normalization strategy.
You have last 2 minutes. Please conclude.
Okay. So this is the data set after normalization. So the next one, this is the how the random forest algorithm works. So it is based on it is primarily based on the decision trees, and decision trees are constructed during the training time. So from the output of the decision trees, based on voting, and prediction of the effort is done. So then the next algorithm is the M5P. This is also a tree-based algorithm, but after the construction of the tree is being pruned and smoothened. Pruning means to eliminate those components which do not contribute much to the uh, predicting factor. So this is how we used Veka tool for prediction. So this is how the results of random forest effort prediction look like, and this is a tree structure. This is the predicted result of M5P algorithm. So when we compare the results of random forest with the actual random forest predicted effort with the actual predicted effort, we get the results like this. And this shows the result of M5P similarly. So to find accuracy, what we did is we predicted the accuracy rate using this formula, and for random forest we observed that it was 97.52%, and for M5P algorithm we found it was 98.5%. Similarly, the error rate was also less for M5P algorithm. So that's all. What we conclude to say is regression models and other machine learning techniques are also available for predicting effort, and we have planned to work further on effort estimation using genetic algorithm also. So that's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Kritika. Sir, any comments regarding presentation?
Kritika, I have two questions for you.
Yes, sir.
Is there a role of a past experience in a project estimation in your model?
What you ask is estimating the effort by using expert analogy or expert judgment method, sir. So they were mostly, and that comes under the non-algorithmic model, and it required many judgments, and it may not be accurate sometimes also. So that we didn't consider in our project, sir.
My last question to you is, how do you propose to include mid-course correction in project estimation?
Sorry, sir. How do you? I couldn't get it.
How do you propose to include mid-course correction in project estimation?
Big code correction.
Yeah, mid-course correction in a project estimation.
I don't get what you mean by mid-course correction, sir.
Just now you have discussed about the mid-course. Yeah, no problem, no problem. Which you have done it. I complete my. We can call the next candidate.
Hello. Yes. Now I would like to invite our next presenter, Dr. Sanjeev Kumar Srivastav. I think Dr. Sanjeev Kumar is absent. So now we move forward. Abhilasha More.
Yes, ma'am. Am I
Yes.
audible?
Yes, Abhilasha, you're audible. Please start your presentation.
Yeah, sure. Ma'am, is the PPT visible?
Yes.
Yeah, but I'm not able to switch it to the slideshow.
You can go to the option slideshow.
Yeah, but it is not working for me. One second.
In case if it is not working, you can next to next it's manually. You can change it manually.
Okay, one second. I'll just stop sharing and restart it again.
Yes.
Just give me a minute. Yes, ma'am. Now is it visible?
Yes. Done.
Okay. Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Abhilasha More, and I'm a research scholar from Vidyanagar Institute of Technology. And I'm here to present my paper named Graph-Based Multi-Document Text Summarization using NLP. I'll be covering the topics of introduction to text summarization, objective, proposed system, future scope, and conclusion. The slide is not moving now. Yeah, okay. So first, I'll talk about the text summarization. It is a process of generating a compressed view of the text. Now, what is the actual meaning of compressing the text, or what is the need of compressing the text? Because nowadays there is too much of data, too much voluminous data is available over the internet, and the user wants to have a very user has very less time to go through all this data. And even if the topic is of interest, still it is they have very less time to read the data. So text summarization is a tool, or text summarization is a method where the data or the available documents can be condensed to be generated to a condensed form. They will be shortened, and the user can view a large text within a short duration. These in this case, text summarization can be useful where a large text can be read within a short duration. Now, text summarization is divided in two types: extraction based and abstractive based. In extraction based text summarization, the most important words from the document is found, then the sentence force of these important words is calculated, and a new sentence is generated. Now, if we talk about the abstraction-based text summarization, the words are selected on the basis of semantic understanding. There are certain algorithms in abstractive summarization, and a new sentence will be generated based on these algorithms. Now, automatic text generation is one of the challenging and interesting problems in the field of natural language processing. It is a process of generating a concise, that is a short summary of the text, because the text is available from multiple resources. These multiple resources can be books, blogs, research papers, scientific magazines, ebooks, emails, Twitter. The data is available everywhere on the internet, online, and hence we need to read this data in a very short duration. Now, creating a gist, creating a summary of this information is a need, or is a use of a text summarizer. The demand for automatic text summarization is high these days because of the availability of large amounts of textual data. Now, the text summarizing tool takes as input, it can be taken as a one document, that is a single document, or multiple documents can be given to a text summarization tool, and a summary can be generated out of it. It can be a single document or a multi-document. After taking these documents as input, pre-processing of the text is performed. Now, what is pre-processing? Pre-processing means you have the entire sentence. There is a maybe the data is of one page, and you want to generate the summary of this one page. So, what we'll first be doing, we'll first be doing the pre-processing of the text, which is removal of the stop word, tokenizing, stemming, lemmatization, etc. And then the further processing, like the sentence scoring or the ranking of the sentence ranking will be done. For the proposed system, we have reviewed the following papers, and I'll just go through these papers in short. First paper is proposed to generate a summary of tweets. Now, generating a summary of tweets is a tedious task because the input is very small. And in this paper, they have used the semantic similarity of the text to generate the similarity of the tweets. Then in the second, this is graph-based approach for automatic text summarization and graph-based algorithms for text summarization. In both these papers, in the second and the third paper that I have referred to, they have used a graph-based summarization technique. And also in the second paper, they have used a NLTK, which is a library, a lexical library, which is used for tokenizing, part of speech tagging, result pronoun resolution, and sentence extraction. And a graph-based ranking algorithm is used. Now, in the fourth paper, we have they have used they have done it for the Hindi paper, and summarizing of it is a technique of multi-document text summarization, where they have used a fuzzy logic for implementing this paper. Now, here in this paper, a single document, this is a multi-document text summarization system where they have used, this is just a comparison study where existing tools are referred in the paper. Referred in the paper. So, what I have made use of these papers, I have gone through these papers and I have generated a problem statement for my system. The aim to design a text, our aim to design is a text summarizer for a news articles. So there is too much of news available on the internet. There are various genres of news which are available.
Bilasha, you have only
Yes.
You have only
you have only 2 minutes. Please conclude.
Okay, ma'am. Okay, ma'am. Okay. So these are the objectives of the text summarizer that we want to develop. We are going to develop a system of multi-document text summarization where we'll be taking the news articles as a text summarizer, and which should be user friendly, and it should also be able to generate graphs through the summarizer with the help of some algorithms. The algorithm or the method that we are going to use is we are going to take uh, right now we are considering only 5 documents for text summarization. We'll be taking 5 documents as input. They should be in the .doc format, and the pre-processing step will be done. Pre-processing step will contain tokenization, POS tagging, resolving a pronoun, and sentence extraction. That will be summary of a single document. Then with the help of a text rank algorithm, we'll be generating a graph, and combining all these together will give me a multi-document single summary. Uh, the future scope of the proposed system includes that right now we want to convert the documents into .doc format, but in the future we can take directly the links of the websites or the online pages which are available, and we can directly feed those pages into the text summarizer tool, and the bookmark pages of the user, whichever is available or whichever the user likes, he can bookmark it and directly supply those bookmark pages or sources to the text summarizer tool. Then rather than generating here in the system, I have done the summary of individual pages, but with the use of different techniques like fuzzy logic or some regression models or some other algorithms, supervised algorithms, we can make use of these algorithms and directly try to generate the summary of multiple documents. Thank you.
Thank you, Abhilasha. Our session chair, any comments?
Abhilasha,
Yes, sir.
how do you use web semantics in text summarization?
Sorry, sir.
How do you use web semantics in text summarization?
Web semantics can be used
Yeah.
in the manner like the people are giving some comments.
Okay.
So we can use those comments, or we can use those sentiments of the users, and we can use the ontology.
Yeah.
We can use an ontology vocabulary, and we can use it for the
Okay.
text summarization to improve the text summarization tool.
Have you used the web semantics in your project or paper?
Right now, no, I have not proposed it. Like, we have not considered web semantics. But thank you, sir. That is an input to the system. I'll surely think
Yeah.
about it.
My last question to you is: can we use system for some other language other than English?
So right now, I'm trying to do it in English, but we are planning for another language where we'll require a parser. So right now, we are only trying to deal with English, and maybe I can include that in a future scope that I'll try to develop it in another language.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, Abhilasha.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
Thank you, Abhilasha. Now I would like to invite our next presenter, Dr. Sanjeev Kumar.
Hello, madam. Can you hear me, please?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. My screen is visible, madam?
Yes, Sanjeev.
1 minute. Okay. Okay. Shall I start, madam?
Yes, please.
Okay. 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 Good afternoon, Paul. My title is Study and Analysis of the NOMA Downlink Transmission Model in the 5G Wireless System. Actually, right now in India, actually, in future, actually, the 5G wireless system is expected within 4 to 5 years. Actually, they are also trying. So basically, we in this paper, actually, I have just discussed in the prospect of the mathematical model as well as the simulation model of the NOMA model. So in the first slide here, I will just give the introduction actually. Okay, what is the NOMA here? So NOMA is nothing but the non-orthogonal multiple access, and we have the conventional type of the orthogonal multiple access, the OMA technique. But by NOMA is preferred for the 5G technology in the wireless network system. I have mentioned basically first of all we'll discuss about the OMA technique because they are solely like occupied the entire system by a particular user. So even though the channel condition is very poor and whatever the bandwidth is there, that will be scared among that particular type of the user only. So ultimately what happens in terms of the performance of the system, it will be largely affected. So that's why the spectrum efficiency will be reduced, and so the degradation of the overall throughput system of the system will be decrease over there. So to overcome this problem, if we are trying to use the
Sorry
NOMA,
for
like
interrupt, Sanjeev. Your screen is not moved.
No, madam, I'm just trying actually. I'm not moving right now actually.
Okay, no problem.
Okay, I will come. So here for the NOMA actually, in the NOMA we are using actually more than one users for each orthogonal resource block, like in terms of the different parameters like time slot, subcarrier, spreading code, etc. over there. So ultimately, if I using all these parts here, so the fairness will be maintained. Fairness means whatever the variable resources are there, that will be distributed among the number of the users over there in order to maintain the net throughput of the system, and subsequently the performance of the system can be improved. So that's why if I using the NOMA, so that can enable the massive connectivity, and that can be supported like Internet of the Things infrastructure in the 5G technology. And NOMA nowadays in the 5G technology, that can easily compatible with the other existing type of the wireless network system here. Now in paper actually, I have developed the NOMA model here. So this is the basic diagram over there. So here we have categorized into the 3 different parts like unordered outage, then the ordered outage in terms of the channel allocation, and finally what should be the optimal allocation of the power there. So the overall idea of the NOMA model here, the 2 certain users are using here, and through the base station, the signal will be decoded here. Now in the user 1, what the signal will be treating in terms of the decoding of the signal, so the noise will be created here, and same thing at the top of the mounted of the throw antenna of the base station, this user 1 will be decoded the signal. But here the user 2, if I'm using the signal interference cancellation over there, so it will be able to decode the user 2 signal. So user 1 will be the weakest one and user 2 will be the strongest one, because whatever the weakest signal is there, through the signal interference cancellation, it will cancel whatever the interference or the noise problem is there, and that will be able to decode the user 2 signal, which is the strongest one. Then this is the mathematical model. Actually, I have derived this one in the paper I have already mentioned there. But in slide here, I am just showing what are the important expressions there. So since I have already mentioned, we are focusing on the two different users. So that's why we have written the probability of the unordered outage user 1 and user 2. And two important parameters. The first one denoted by beta, which is the channel gain we have considered. Second one is the channel coefficient denoted by R. So we have focused on this one. And but these are the diagrams for the user 1 and user 2, and then this is the simulation results here for this one. So here actually we have focused on the two important parameters. The first one is the channel gain and second one is the channel fading coefficient over there. If the channel gain increases a beta over there, so ultimately in case of the unordered, whatever the probability of the user 1 and user 2, that will limit the entire usage of the serving, which will be served a single user in each orthogonal resource block of the NOMA. Whereas in case of this one, if I'm talking about the channel ordering over there, again two mathematical expression for user 1, user 2, and then the simulation results of this so that when we are going to increase the channel gain, it means the probability of the first user, not the entire both users, what we have seen in the unordered here. So probability of the first user only will limit the outage probability of user 2 due to the noise. And then if I'm using the successive interference cancellation, whatever we have mentioned in this diagram there, so they will be able to decode this one user 2, and then the user 2 become the strongest signal of this one. And finally, for this one channel ordering over there, and then we will see what is the probability of the user 1 and user 2 in case of the optimum power allocation. So we have focused on the two important, this one capacity for the optimum one and the random power allocation. So here they will both be using to improve the overall system performance, but in the better prospect, if I'm talking about the downlink here, in the downlink I have already mentioned that could be used for the each and every user that will be allocated the power allocation. Whereas in case of the uplink, that's why I have not preferred the uplink, because uplink it is very difficult to identify which user will be able to allocate the power allocations over there. So that's why if we are going to consider the both random location as well as the optimal location, they will be certainly improve the overall system performance. And finally, this is the conclusive part of this one. So if I'm going to maintain the fairness in the large context over there, so the capacity of the optimum allocation in the downlink transmission will produce a better result as compared to that of the random allocation, because the fairness condition is maintained. So whatever the available resources in terms of the variable one are there, that will be equally distributed on the high priority basis in order to get the high net throughput, and subsequently the overall system performance can be improved. Thank you very much, sir. Hello.
Yes, Sanjeev. Thank you so much for your presentation. Sir, please, any comments?
Sanjeev,
Yes, sir.
which simulator or tool are you using for conducting your studies?
Actually, sir, I have used the MATLAB here actually for this purpose. Even NS2 can also be used, no problem. Actually, for my research work, I have used the NS2 here. But to develop this research paper for this conference here, I am using the MATLAB over there. So there are three certain conditions I have used for the unordered, order, and optimum power allocation, sir.
I'm surprised you have shown a single slide. Not even your algorithms, not even your result to us, so that we can understand that you have done it.
No, I have the mathematical expression. If you want, you permit me, I will show you in the paper. Actually, I have this mathematical expression.
It is not my permission. It is your feeling.
No, I'm just telling, sir. This is a purely mathematical one.
Yeah.
This is the mathematical one. Whatever the mathematical expression I'm getting, and on that basis, I have just compared with the simulation results. What type of simulation result I have occurred over there, sir? It's a basic.
Even I have not seen your results, real results in your paper, in your presentation.
No, this is the PPT I'm going to present this one. If you just go through the paper, sir, I have already mentioned each and all these things there in the detail of the mathematical expression, sir.
Okay, no problem. Yeah, thank you, Sanjeev.
Okay. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you, Sanjeev. Now I would like to invite our next presenter, Rajeshwari.
Yes, ma'am. Am I audible?
Yes, Rajeshwari.
Okay.
Please go ahead with your presentation.
Yeah. Is it visible, ma'am?
Yes.
Yeah, good afternoon to all. Myself, Professor Rajeshwari P. I'm presenting the paper on synthesis of VLSI structural cell partitioning using genetic algorithm. Father of evolution, Charles Darwin, said that it is not the strongest of the species that survives, nor the most intelligent, but it is the species that is most responsive to change. This concept is the core of the theory of evolution, and it provides an outlook of how the genetics works. And a genetic algorithm is an optimization method inspired by the biology. In biological reproduction, haploid cells, that means male and female cells containing only one chromosome each, combine to make a diploid cells which contains two chromosomes. In this process, the chromosomes cross over and genetic material is exchanged between them. Chromosomes are comprised of genes. Chromosomes are made of genes, and each gene provides a genetic code for a specific trait. For example, eye color, hair color, or height, etc. And the regenerated offspring bears some of the characteristics from the parents, so, some traits from the mother and some traits from the father. A genetic algorithm is an optimization technique which uses the concepts of evolutionary natural selection to obtain optimal solutions for the complex problems. Indeed, a genetic algorithm is also referred as an evolutionary algorithm. The steps involved in the implementation of a genetic algorithm. First step is initialization. It is the representation of the chromosomes. That means defining the population and deciding how to code the solutions as chromosomes. In this case, we have taken random permutation or .v files or .lib files and will represent it in matrix format for the coordinates of the chromosomes. Next step is defining the fitness function. It defines how best or how efficient the partitioning is. So it represents what is better. For example, it may be lower cost or higher speed. In this case, we have considered a complex function. It includes cost, time, and area function. Next is selection. Selecting the high fitness chromosomes from the population and allow them to breed. That means genetically crossing over to create new offsprings. Up next is mutation. It is very much important to avoid being stuck at local minimas. Mutation provides a path to reach the global minimum. So it includes a small element, the chromosome, that means small random changes to the chromosomes introduced to increase the diversity of the population. After introducing mutation, assess the fitness of the new offspring, and if they are more fit than the previous population, then replace those individuals with the new offsprings. Then repeat the above steps until getting stable as a proper answer. Some of the real world applications are logistics, for example, traveling salesman problem, engineering design, robotics, VLSI. Right now what I'm explaining is a VLSI area in that circuit partitioning problem. So genetic algorithm is used in circuit partitioning problem in VLSI, object recognition, analytics, and many other fields. Now, the question is why genetic algorithm in VLSI circuit partitioning? Because it provides higher efficiency in less time and self-partitioning, and it can solve more complex circuits with less time, and it can provide more stable solutions, and it minimizes the trade-off between time and efficiency. The important aspects of genetic algorithm are, already I said, so it is very much important to avoid being stuck at local minimas. The mutation provides a path to reach global minimas. So as the level of mutation increases, time taken to reach global minima also increases, but accuracy decreases. As the level of mutation decreases,
time taken to reach a global minima increases, but accuracy is increased and more number of global minimas are gathered. Hence, we can get global minima value with more accuracy. Next is fitness function. So it represents how well or how efficient the partitioning is. So there are two equations given. Fn is nothing but fitness for the current function. Alpha, beta, gamma are the weights for f of a, f of t, and f of c. F of a is nothing but area function. F of t is nothing but time function. F of c is nothing but cost function. And the minus value in the first equation, that is the negative sign, indicates fitness function value decreases as the cost, time, and area function value increases. That means we are taking the minimum value as the global maximum. The second
Rajeshwari, you have last 2 minutes. Please conclude.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. The second equation is used to map the fitness function to a positive value in the scale of u. U is the upper limit, and second equation is used to map all the local minima values within the global maximum and global minima value, so that we'll get a distribution graph like this. And this is the flow chart for the graph partitioning problem. First step is get the VLSI circuit data from .v or .lib file and represent them as chromosome. Find the fitness for each chromosome. Then increment the iteration. Check if iteration reaches maximum or not, or the fitness is satisfied. If it is so, stop and get the global minimum value from the data collected. If it is not reaching the maximum, or if it is not satisfying the fitness, then introduce mutation in chromosome after some number of iterations. Select the chromosome with the best fitness, initiate a crossover to create a new set of offsprings, then again find the fitness of each chromosome, increment the iteration until getting the proper solution. And this is the MATLAB implementation of initialization of a chromosome representation. And the second diagram is a distribution graph. It shows how the local minima and global minimas are distributed in graph. And this is the first graph is crossover matrix for the genetic algorithm. And the second diagram is the best solution history of genetic algorithm. So here x-axis represents number of iterations. When number of iterations increases, y-axis fitness value starts decreasing. Fitness value contains area, time, and cost functions. So when number of iterations increasing, area, time, and cost function decreases. So comparison result of genetic algorithm with the brute force partitioning algorithm is given in the table. So brute force partitioning got a fitness value as 401.29 after completing 4,290 plus iterations. Partitioning using genetic algorithm got fitness value as 100.36 after 1,320 iterations. So this is 4 times better fitness, 4 times less fitness value compared to brute force partitioning algorithm. From this, we can understand that genetic algorithm can supersede and dominate the brute force partitioning algorithm. And finally, this paper is not possible without the help of other researchers and their papers. So I thank you all for your patience. Thank you once again.
Thank you, Rajeshwari. Sir, any comments?
Yeah, Rajeshwari, one question from my side is,
Yes, sir.
who else has used genetic algorithms for VLSI?
Yeah. Who else means? I'm not getting, sir. Author.
Yeah, who else has used genetic algorithm for VLSI?
For VLSI, many authors used, sir. For example, one author, Manikantan R, he has presented many papers using genetic algorithm.
Have you come across their methodology?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I literature survey. I did all these papers. After that, I did this work.
Yeah. Have you found out any research gap in your research?
That's what, sir. Now, like a random permutation I did, I have to take one complex circuit and I have to apply this. That is the second stage of this work.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you, Rajeshwari.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Rajeshwari. Now I would like to invite our next presenter, Akanksha Bansal.
Yes, ma'am. Can you hear me, ma'am?
Yes.
Yeah, I want to share my screen. Can you give me the controls?
Yes, Akansha.
Yeah, is it visible?
Yes, Akansha, it's visible.
Yeah. Okay. Good afternoon to everyone present here. I'm here to present my paper on balanced accuracy of collaborative recommender system. I'm a research scholar in Delhi University, and my supervisor is Dr. V.S.N. Dikshit from Delhi University. These are the contents that I would be covering in my presentation. Now, collaborative recommender systems are being used tremendously by majority of e-commerce industry today. These systems help users to choose for an item of their interest. These systems use the ratings given by its users to make the recommendations. However, it is not necessary that these ratings are always true and authentic. So in such case, the biased ratings lead to attacks like push attacks and nuke attacks. So in our work, we have studied the effect of these attacks, push attacks and nuke attacks, on the performance of collaborative recommender systems by using the metric balanced accuracy. Now, the recommender systems help people to make decisions. They have emerged as a vital tool to handle the information very effectively caused by exceptional growth on web. Collaborative systems are, recommender systems are basically of two types: collaborative recommender systems and content-based recommender systems. In content-based recommender systems, the content of an item with a user profile is compared. An accurate and significant recommendation is then obtained by contextual information available in these systems. While in collaborative filtering, recommendations are collective by many users. The items are then rated according to the given recommendations by these users for the items. Now, I have mentioned few of the related work here in my presentation, though I have used many. Basically, previously the authors have focused on to provide highly accurate recommendation list and to protect users' private data while making recommendations. They have not considered the attacks while doing so. However, some authors have identified the attacks in their work, but majority have not worked upon the effect on performance due to these attacks. So this is my problem statement. In CRS, ratings highly contribute in prediction of items. It is therefore necessary to identify and classify the biased ratings. Actual and authentic ratings increase the system's efficiency, whereas biased ratings affect the system's accuracy adversely, and it may lead to false recommendations to the user. So PN attacks alter the ratings of items by injecting higher ratings and lower ratings to the system, which leads in false recommendations. So the effect of PN attacks on performance of CRS is analyzed by evaluating various measure metrics. So these are the metrics that we have used. Our main focus is on balanced accuracy. The dataset I have used is Brooke-Cossings dataset, which is easily available on Kaggle. It has 1.1 million ratings with 270,000 books by 90,000 users. The lowest rate, the ratings are given in the scale of 1 to 10. 1 is the lowest rating and 10 is the highest rating. And the set has 3 tables, namely users, books, and book ratings. The assumption for our experiment is that we have not taken the number of users into the account. We have only emphasized on the ratings that are given for the books. Then we have pushed attacks. I mean, we have pushed value 10 for the push attacks randomly to the data set. Then the effect of push attacks is observed at various proportions, and performances of CRS after injecting the attacks is compared with the performance of original CRS. Then the performance is evaluated using these metrics. Similarly, in the next stage, we have injected nuke attacks for the data set with different proportions, and again the comparisons are done. For push attacks, as I have mentioned, I have used highest rating 10, and for lowest attack, for nuke attack, I have used the lowest rating as 0, and rating 5 is taken as the average rating. Now in the algorithm, we have used Pearson's correlation coefficient to find the similar users, and KNN algorithm to cluster the similar users. The TN attacks are injected and various metrics are calculated with different proportions. So this is the algorithm. Now these are the results for actual book ratings for injected PN attacks. Here we can see mu E, that is mean absolute error, is coming out to be 4% for 1% of data set, and 1% for the nuke attacks. Now, if we see this slide, this is the result for push attacks. The accuracy for 1% of data set came out to be 9%, whereas the balanced accuracy was only 5%. Similarly, for nuke attacks, the accuracy was 9%. Again, balanced accuracy came out to be only 5%. The same procedure we did for different proportions of the data set. We took like half of the data set, then 1/64 of the data set, and we achieved these results. This is for push attacks. These results we obtained for nuke attacks. So finally, conclusion, a recommender system requires being efficient and accurate so as to generate correct recommendations. Results show push attacks escalates the accuracy of CRS, whereas N attacks degrades the accuracy. When PN attacks are injected to the original dataset, the dataset became biased. So balanced accuracy is used to evaluate the effect of performance. While conducting the experiment, it is concluded that at least 1/64 of dataset values were required to reach the results. The limitation of my work is that in PN attacks from non-authentic users are studied and no acquaintance about background of users is recognized. Our future work will obviously take this into account, and secondly, we'll be trying to classify PN attacks in group recommender systems by enhancing multi-expert systems. Thank you.
Thank you, Akansha. Sir, any comment regarding this presentation?
Few questions are there. What is the size of your data set?
Sir, it was 1.1 million. So I divided the data set into many subsets.
Okay. How do we use the recommender system for incremental rating flowing through new users?
Sir, actually recommender systems are basically the decision tools. If for a new user, it acts as a decision tool because you suppose I want to buy item A, then I'll be obviously looking for the feedbacks and ratings given by the previous users. Hello?
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Your voice
Sir,
is
for
not
new
clear.
users, it.
Yeah.
Sir,
Yeah.
now is it okay?
Yeah, it is okay.
Yeah. Sir, I'm saying for new users, it is the recommender systems are really important because the collaborative recommender system gives the rate, it accumulates the ratings given by the previous users upon their feedback. So for any new user, it becomes very important. He looks for the ratings, he looks for the feedback so that he can easily decide what item he has, the item of interest, I mean, he wants to take. So in my work, actually, sir, the main focus is on balanced accuracy because almost all the recommender systems are focusing only on the accuracy. Performance is being measured only on the accuracy. And when we talk about the accuracy, we actually are talking about only the N top listed items. But it is not necessary that only the top N items would be attacked. It may be the same that suppose I am a company owner and my item is not in the N top list. So I'll definitely hire some people and to rate for my item, and I'll make push attacks in the system. So that is why we don't only need to see the accuracy of the top N items, but it is very necessary that we should we should see the overall performance of our recommender system. So that is the need of an R.
Okay. Okay. Thank you, Abhilasha.
Thank you, Abhilasha, for your presentation.
Sorry, this is Akanksha.
Yes, thank you, Akanksha. And now I would like to invite our next presenter. It's a Parul Ranjan. I think Parul Ranjan is absent, and Madhavi Pingali, both are absent. Now Ratna Patil. Our last presenter is Ratna Patil. Hello.
Hello, good
Ratna
afternoon.
Patil.
Yes, madam. Let me share the screen.
Yes, please.
Madam, the message is coming. You cannot start screen share while the other participant is sharing. Let her remove the screen.
Wait. Now you can share your screen.
All right, 1 second. Is it visible, madam?
Yes, please go ahead.
Right, right. Good afternoon, one and all. I'm Ratna Patil, Assistant Professor at Noida Institute of Engineering and Technology, Noida. I'm going to present my paper on an experimental approach towards type 2 diabetes diagnosis using cultural algorithm. I shall be covering this presentation under the following headings like introduction, then related works, proposed approach, experimental details followed by results and analysis and conclusion, right? So I have selected this topic because the current approaches have often classified the patients as either having diabetes or a healthy individual, ignoring the pre-diabetic stage of a patient. This leads to increased incidence of diabetes. If no preventive measures are taken on time, it can be curbed at the pre-diabetic stage by introducing lifestyle changes. Most of the work in the literature has been done on PIMA diabetes data set, which is available on UCI repository, but it has only two labels, healthy and diabetic. There is no mention of pre-diabetic stage, and hence I have selected this topic, right? So there are few facts about this type 2 diabetes diagnosis. In India, more than 72 million people are affected by type 2 diabetes. If this disease is not treated, then complications like heart attack, kidney failure, stroke, and blindness, etc. are happening. 1/3 of the population go undetected in the early stage. Early detection and treatment offers substantial health benefits. The ability to predict the diabetes early helps to prevent further progression of this disease. And this T2DM can be prevented and delayed by adopting healthier lifestyle like daily exercise, avoiding junk food and all that. So objectives of my research work is like to reduce time between onset of diabetes and clinical diagnosis, to develop a computer-based predictive model to detect T2DM at an earlier stage and monitor the disease, improving the accuracy of the predictive model by using culture algorithm and ANN for T2DM. I have studied few papers, and the methodology used by these papers were like Neuville algorithm, support vector machine, neural networks, fuzzy logic, ANFIS, PSO, ABC algorithms like that, right? So related papers are studied and their methodology, their limitations and results are presented, included in the slides. So these are few papers I have studied, and their methodology and limitations, accuracy are mentioned here. If you observe, are like 75%, 79%, somewhere it is going until 82 also. But the results of this paper were based only on 30 records, right? And in one of the paper, it was going to 85%. But the knowledge retrieved in this research study was based only on sample diabetic data set, right? It was not on the PIMA diabetic data set also. That is a benchmark data set. So here, my proposed approach, what I have used, here I am getting 88.3% accuracy with the data set, that is real-time data set I have created with 1,133 records and 32 attributes, right? And with the benchmark data set, that is PIMA data set, I am getting the accuracy that is 82%. Here there are few approaches and their accuracy I have mentioned, that is only a selected work, right? Let us come to the goal. Goal of the proposed model is to select the best feature, that is a near optimal subset that has the best results of the classification task. So for this purpose, I have used culture algorithm along with the network. This cultural algorithm is used for searching problem space to find all the prospective feature subset and NN is employed for evaluation of the performance of each subset. So basically here, evolutionary algorithm, CA is an evolutionary based algorithm that is used to solve large and complex optimization problems. I have employed here artificial neural network because of its learning and adaptation capability. And advantages of cultural algorithm are like dual evaluation structure, which consists of two spaces like population space and belief space. This cultural algorithm is proposed by Reynolds, and the most distinctive feature of cultural algorithm is the use of belief space, which through an influence function affects the next generation. In the next slide, I will be presenting the pseudocode for the cultural algorithm and corresponding communication protocol. Here, firstly, population space and belief space are initialized with the random solutions, and then few statements are repeated or they are in loop till the termination condition is satisfied. First step is like evaluation of this population space, and after the evaluation based on the fitness function, for the fitness function I have employed artificial neural network. Based on that fitness function, you can get the best individuals and those in the population of best, and this is your kth iteration, right? Then after getting this best individuals, I will be updating the belief space, and then after updation of the belief space, you go for the creation of the next generation, and this is in repetition, right? So let me come to the next slide. In this slide, the representation of the population space is shown. Feature present will be represented by 1 and the absent feature will be represented by 0, right? The communication protocol has two subspecies, as I said. Population is representing the genetic component and belief space is represented by the cultural component. The experiences of individuals in the population space identified through acceptance functions are used for creation of knowledge residing within the belief space. An acceptance function determines which individual experiments should be used or considered to contribute to the current beliefs. The adjusted beliefs then influence the evolution of the population. The communication between the two components is shown here in this figure, right? This is population, then this is belief space. Belief space is updated. After updation, it influences the population space, and this is in repetition, right? So now let me go to the here. Okay, this is about the previous slides only. What is population, what is chromosome, and all that, right? I want to mention one point here, that is in the proposed model, NN is used for a fitness function for each chromosome, and based on the selected features, NN is used for training and testing. The classification error of each chromosome is used as a score. The architecture diagram is already explained, and this was just for the presentation I have included. Now in the belief space, I will be using two knowledge sources. One is normative knowledge source and other is your situational knowledge source. The updation formula for the normative knowledge source is provided here in the left hand side column, right? And this is the lower limit and upper limits, right? And the updation formula for the situational knowledge is provided here on in the right hand side column. Using these formulas, I am updating normative knowledge and the situational knowledge stored in the belief space. But when I use this knowledge, I am using the combination of both. In some of the studies, either they are using normative knowledge or situational component, but I have used both the components. And the size of the normative component is computed by using this formula, and it is stored in sigma j. And I am using this sigma j for the computation of value of j gene of the ith individual. J is for this gene. Gene is the feature number of the feature. I is your iteration number. I is your instance number or record number, right? For the iterations. Now here, based on this formula, I will be computing this Sij value. And then when I implemented this, I got the following results. Like see, when you observe this confusion matrix, I am getting the accuracy that is 88.2%. Right, and this is on the real-time data set. I have used records around 1,133, and when I used cultural algorithm, I got the accuracy of this 88.26%. And with the help of only genetic algorithm, I was getting 85%. Because here I am having two spaces, belief space and population space in the cultural algorithm. So accuracy has been increased. But for comparison, I am using the PIMA data set also, because this data set is studied in the rest of the literature review papers. So I have applied the same algorithm for the PIMA data set also, and I was getting accuracy that is about 82%. So confusion matrix is showing that accuracy has been increased. I have used 3 types of labels here: diabetic patient, pre-diabetic patient, and healthier patient, right? So here ROC is also showing that the results are quite good. And the conclusion of my study is that this study has applied cultural algorithm for enhancing the diabetes prediction. The obtained results are very important for both the predicting diabetes accurately and for medical data mining community. The proposed approach has increased accuracy as compared to the earlier computer-based diagnostic process. Here, in the next slide, I have shown, given some papers, selected papers. And here in the last slide, I have given the attributes I have collected for the development of this predictive model. And here I ends the presentation. You can ask me questions.
Thank you, Ratna, for your presentation.
Right,
Sir, any
right.
comments?
Yeah, Ratna, you
Yes,
have
sir.
used a data set which is not a benchmark data set.
Yeah, but then for that purpose
How?
only I am using the PIMA data set for comparison with others. And this is a real data set. I have collected the data from the lab, sir. And this application will be useful in local hospitals. So for that purpose, I wanted, because early diagnosing the diabetes is always helpful, sir. Because we will be getting
Then how?
pre-diabetics.
Yeah, then how will you compare your result with that of the any other research scholar?
I have implemented the method on PIMA also, sir. So PIMA is used by other research scholars or other in the literature review paper, PIMA. And in the PIMA data set, it is available on UCI repository, and the results are having like around 82%.
Okay. How would you understand that your results are correct?
Sir, I have implemented SEO algorithm also and colony optimization. I am getting around near about same, but less than culture algorithm. Around 81% I am getting in SEO, and PSO I am getting around 80%, sir.
Okay.
For the same data set.
Okay. Yeah, thank you, Ratna. It's nice to
Right,
hear you.
sir. It's a good day, sir.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Ratna Patil. Now we completed all our presentations. So now I would like to invite Dr. Amit Joshi for closing remarks.
Hi, good evening. And I hope that everything in the session went well. And I thank the chair of the session, Dr. Neeraj Bhargav, for kindly accepting our request and chairing this valuable session. I understand and believe that when we have switched from physical modes to digital modes, chairing a session has become more difficult than in usual times, because a person has to constantly sit for 100 minutes and constantly review the people, listen them, and then comment on their work which they have done. So I really congratulate Dr. Neeraj Bhargav for his tremendous efforts for being with us and supporting us in this initiative. And I would like to ask Richa to share a token of appreciation for Dr. Neeraj Bhargav as a token of remembrance from our side in new digital forms. So, Dr. Neeraj Bhargav, this is for you. And thank you very much for your sharing this valuable session. My second part is due to the authors of this current session, and I believe that there is a time frame of approximately 7 to 8 months when an author submits a paper and it gets published, and between they have to present their paper or they receive the review comments, the acceptance of the paper, they revise the paper, they submit the final version, they sign the CTP form and everything. So it's a time frame of approximately 7 to 8 months in total for a paper to be published and become online. So I thank you all the authors for being so patient in these times, and in future for the publication process, I assure you that we have already sent the data to Springer for publication in 2 volumes, and we hope to complete the publication approximately 4 months, maybe some delay and maybe some early also. Depends on the publisher and the number of queries we are getting during the process of publication. In case we have any queries for your paper, we will definitely ping you up and get your input back to cure that query as soon as possible. And regarding the certificates and payment receipt and your thank you letter, you will just receive them once we are complete with this session. And I wish you all once again all the very best. If you have any queries, please feel free to write to me at amit@gr.foundation. Although our team is there in back support, you can always write to support@ict4sd.org. I am proud to share and announce that we have in last 5 years approximately benefited, and we have made a network of more than 5,000 to 6,000 researchers which are participating and contributing in this conference, and we hope to grow bigger in the 6th version of ICT for SD, and hopefully we will conduct that conference in Goa physically. So till then, good evening, good afternoon, and good morning to wherever you are and what time zone you are fitted in. And thank you very much for supporting us, for trusting us, and we look forward to your contributions and support in all future initiatives and research conferences. Thank you very much.